New Balance and Boston College football, a partnership that could change the future of the Eagles.
You are Locked On Boston College, your daily podcast on the Boston College Eagles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome everyone. This is Locked On Boston College, your team every day. I am your host, AJ Black of Eagle Insider, part of the 247 Network. I have been covering Boston College for over a decade, and I have been hosting the show for over 5 years. Thank you all for joining us. Today's episode has been brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first order. Now, on today's show, we're going to sit down with Jackson Moore of Stanford 247 to talk about the Cardinal. We're going to find out about Frank Reich. We're going to get the insider information on this upcoming season. And if you're heading out to Stanford, get some info on that as well. But let's kick this off with the news of the day. On Monday morning, New Balance and Boston College announced a partnership that is going to include football now. Now, before this announcement, BC has been using New Balance for 30 of their 31 sports teams. The one holdout was football, which was using Adidas. Now, we knew kind of that this was coming because Bill O'Brien was on the Bobby Bones show earlier this winter, and he talked about it. And we kind of knew this was going to be before that too, but Bill O'Brien solidified that it was happening before next season. He said, that they're going to be using a lot of throwback uniforms, that there's going to be an emphasis to go back to kind of where the Flutie days were. And I'm all for it because I think New Balance has been pretty good for Boston College. Now, once you get past the stupid dad jokes and the people who don't understand that New Balance is not the same that New Balance was 20 years ago, you get to, see that this is a apparel company based in Boston that really does understand BC and could be a big thing for BC because New Balance, their only FBS program in the country that has their apparel now is Boston College. This gives BC the chance to be kind of like the Oregon to Nike. Not to that scale. Clearly, Nike is a gigantic mega company. But still, when you are unique to a brand and a brand that is better than you expect, you can do some special things. And maybe the financial partnership will help elevate your program in ways that people right now don't even talk about. When you get past the dad jokes, that the shoes are things that your dads would wear, look at who is partnered with New Balance right now. Cooper Flagg, number one draft pick in college basketball this upcoming season. One of the biggest names in the biggest name in college basketball, who will be a big time name in the NBA. He's a New Balance athlete. You have Shohei Ohtani, the outfielder for the Los Angeles Dodgers. One of the best, if not the best baseball player in the world. You have football players like Marvin Harrison Jr., Chase Young, like young players that are very, very good. So the brand image has changed. And young people are wearing New Balance because they have much more, their styles are much more attuned to what kids are looking for. So this is good because now BC is at the ground level with a apparel company that is local, maybe can do some things to help you. Maybe when they're going to want to support this because when you turn on BC football, you're going to see the patch of New Balance. And New Balance does not want to see their flagship school go 2-10. They don't want to see their team get blown out, 7 times a year. Maybe New Balance is going to want to put money into the program through NIL initiatives to help Boston College out. That is the kind of thinking that I think would be really helpful for BC. Think about this. Maybe in the future, you have a quarterback like Chris Vargas, kid from St. John's Prep. He's going to be a 4 or 5 star quarterback. I can tell you right now. Maybe a school maybe New Balance is going to see this and go, this is a guy that could help elevate our brand. We're going to sponsor him at Boston College through NIL and get him to BC instead of a school like Penn State or Syracuse or these other schools. I could see this paying dividends and help bring in recruits that maybe you couldn't have gotten before, because then these, talented players are going to be wearing New Balance. I was hoping about this. I was hoping this for basketball. Hasn't happened yet. Football's a different story, though. Football is a much more marketable return on item that is going to get you a higher return on your investment, in my opinion. As much as you want to some people rag on BC that they're not, whatever. They get good ratings. They do. They're on national television. I mean, we just talked about Michigan State playing them on NBC next year. New Balance is going to want their product to look good. They're not going to want their product to go out there and lose. So I think they're going to want to put money into this program. That's where I think this is going to go. I think that's what's going to help BC. So in terms of their designs, I'm really excited because I hated Under Armour. I thought Under Armour was uninspired and boring. Adidas was fine. Like they didn't really, I felt like they didn't really change all that much. They had some good stuff here and there. They got the block letters on their shoulders and things like that. But like, it still was really kind of standard. We've seen through baseball, basketball, and a little bit of hockey what New Balance can do. And they change things up. Think about and you may not like it, and that's okay. The basketball ones, for instance, they have those gray, I forget exactly what they say on the shirts, but it does not say Boston College. It has something else, and I'm completely blanking as I say it. But it's like a slogan, and it's in gold, but it's in gray. Like you never see that before. There's different baseball uniforms of different colors that we've never in combos. Like you had the old school BC hats this year, completely different. And I know the hockey unis and the hockey sweaters are very different too. So they can change some things. And I'm very interested to see what their ideas are going to be for football. Now, I was hoping, my hope was that official visit season would come. And I don't think we've seen many of the photo shoots yet from the kids. But the ones that I have seen, I was like, maybe they're going to be in their uniforms, and maybe we'll get to see what the New Balance are going to look like. But they're in tracksuits, which still look cool. If you have not checked it out, Somed Ada, a cornerback, he has one up right now, and it's a cool like white tracksuit. I was hoping for the uniforms, but we didn't get to see that. So this is good for BC. New Balance and Boston College. This gives you a chance to try something, and I think being a little bit of forward thinking and a little bit of taking a chance could pay big dividends in the end for Boston College and maybe get them, the publicity, the funds to put them at another level. I think this is good. We'll have to wait to see what happens. Now, in a moment, we're going to be joined by Jackson Moore of Stanford 247. You're going to want to hear his thoughts on the Cardinal. We'll go into that in just a moment. Have you ever checked your bank account and wondered, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. And that's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. For my family, I've had to track better with the restaurants and a little bit of my entertainment. I love to make sure that I'm not spending too much on streaming services. And you know what? Monarch Money helped me catch that and save some money for myself. So take care of control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for 50% off your first year. This is Locked On Boston College, your team every day. I'm your host, AJ Black of Eagle Insider, part of the 247 network, and we're getting ready for the season. We're doing some previews. We're getting to know the schools themselves. This isn't going to be huge analysis of a school, but we're going to talk about Stanford next. Now, BC hasn't played Stanford since the early 2000s, and on today's show, we're going to be joined by Jackson Moore of 247 Stanford Sites. Jackson, how's it going?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Great. So, Stanford, first year in the ACC. How did things go?
I think it was not as rough as far as travel as expected, especially when it's football. There's really, you got 3 trips across the country. Everything else was, I mean, it would have been nice to know ahead of time. Maybe the Notre Dame game, and for Cal, they went east as well. So the non-conference slate wasn't necessarily the best matchup for being in year one of the ACC for either
Mm-hmm.
school. But it's really been the Olympic sports that's been taking a toll. I know, talking to staff members, that's a little much making all that travel. But football was not so bad. Just both programs trying to kind of Stanford especially really rebuilding, and when the team was kind of decimated by injuries and they hit a game at Clemson, those type of perfect storms didn't go so
Mm-hmm.
well on.
Yeah. So this year, for folks that are at home, the start time for the BC Stanford game has been set. Jackson, are you out in Palo Alto or that area, or?
So I roam around. I cover Stanford, Cal, San Jose State in the Bay Area, and Fresno State, a little about 3 hours southeast from there. So
So
I'm
a
all
lot of
over.
so a lot of us out here, especially us with the young children that are on schedules, we're starting at 10:30, and I know when I did not have kids, Pac-12 after dark was one of my favorites. It was like part of my tradition, right? Like you go to a BC game at noon, you watch the 4 o'clock game, primetime game, then you unwound in bed watching Pac-12 after dark. Now they got to cover it, and the game's probably not going to end till like 1 with press conference. I'm not getting to bed till like 3 or 4 in the morning. I'm a little worried about this, but I think it's going to be fun. I think this is, 2 teams that have played each other in the past. And one of the big things that is going to happen this year is you have 2 former NFL coaches battling each other. Let's talk a little bit about Frank Reich. I'm not going to get into the whole Troy Taylor thing. That, if you want to look that up, there's a lot of bad stuff that happened with that. There's different perspectives on what happened, and I'm sure he has his perspective, the school has theirs, but he's gone. And that's what happened, right? Tell me a little bit about Frank Reich and how he's kind of handled the late start. Bill O'Brien had something similar last year. Jeff Hafley left for Green Bay in mid-February, So how is Frank Reich kind of handling this right now?
Yeah, the unique part about it is that they've come out straight out of the gates and said this is only going to be a 1-season deal, and maybe you never know if the season goes well that changes, but that's been the messaging from the start. And then you've got Andrew Luck, who is now the general manager, and he's overseeing the coaching situation. Supposedly, if everything goes to plan, he's going to spend all year long basically looking for the next coach to a certain degree. They're all locked in on this year, so Luck is kind of driving the ship, and Reich is just all football for another 7 months or so, and that's kind of how they've approached it. So Reich has changed the offense a bit. Most of the defensive staff is still there, and he's not changing too much there, but it is going to be a little more of a pro-style offense. They're switching things up there, but otherwise it's kind of all everyone's trying to buy into this one season and this temporary outlook and see what happens from there.
Right. So have you heard any buzz about who Andrew Luck might be interested in, or has there been any leaks or anything like that you've heard of any names that might be popping up for Stanford?
Yeah, not too much. There was initially, when this whole situation happened, you could just link a bunch of names to Andrew Luck and through his NFL run and the ones that have been at Stanford. And there was several others that were in the kind of floating around that weren't even Frank Reich, which now in hindsight seems pretty obvious that it was that he would be a guy that could do this. So I think they're going to wait it out. Maybe someone shines this fall and that goes up their leaderboard. I think that's kind of how they're going to approach it. But you would think that some of those same names that were mentioned beforehand might be in the mix again here.
Yeah, I think it's going to be. I think this is going to be a really interesting hire for you guys. I think Andrew Luck, obviously, I think that's such a great head of your college football program. To have him as your general manager, someone who knows your program, who is a legend at Stanford. To get somebody like that and to have them lead the next hire, you must feel like things are going in the right direction, and there must be a level of trust with the fan base for this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's been obviously a face for the program, and the last couple of years, he's been going back to school. He's been around campus. I
Mm-hmm.
just kind of run into him being around the facilities in the
Mm-hmm.
athletic department area of campus. So that's been pretty neat, and you just know he's invested, and he'd be around even if he wasn't the general manager. I saw him at games in the stands, not necessarily getting recognized or any promotion or anything. So that's just the kind of guy he is, and it's very interesting to see him roaming around the practice field, even taking snaps at quarterback and for the scout team at
Yep.
sometimes. And then you'll see him 30 minutes later with his bicycle helmet on, wheeling away after practice ends, going
Mm-hmm.
home. So a very unique figure and very much Stanford leading the program.
So let's talk about. I know it's a lot of things have changed. 3-9 first year in the ACC. What went right? What went wrong with that group? Was it just an off year? Was it a transitional year? What were your thoughts about how 2024 went for the Cardinal?
Yeah, so kind of the groundwork for how that season came to be was David Shaw had a great run at Stanford. The last 2 years were 3-9, and it was pretty bad. And when they made the move, a ton of players transferred out, and Stanford, not participating in the portal at that time, bringing them in, really had to rely on freshman recruits coming in while losing most of their upperclassmen and star players. So last year was year 2 for Troy Taylor, and had 2 classes and was starting to maybe get some momentum going. And it seemed like when everything was clicking, it was a pretty competitive team. It was just the margin for error was slim, and they had a pretty bad run of injuries. And you could see there was games, especially at Syracuse. I think the team that went there and won, if they could have maintained that all year long, it could have been a team that maybe got to 6 wins. But they got some bad injuries, and they played some good teams at bad times, and got really blown out. And you saw some life. They beat Louisville late in the year. So I think it was just a team, a program that's still undermanned and was getting close to there. And then you felt like year 3 of Troy Taylor could be maybe where they get over the hump and have a full team actually. And
Yep.
then once he gets let go, they lose a bunch more players that would have been key guys. So they
Yeah.
have the floodgates for portal transfers. There's like 15 coming in, so that should help. But they didn't have that last year for sure.
Now, in a moment, I want to talk to Jackson about this year. Not going to dive into too much, but there was a big transfer exodus, including some really key players like David Bailey, their linebacker. Want to find out about that, we'll ask some questions about the quarterback, and maybe get some advice for BC fans who may be heading west to see this game, what they should hit up, and what's it like being at the Stanford Stadium. I want to hear all about that in just a moment. Welcome back. This is Locked On Boston College, your team every day. I'm your host, AJ Black, also the editor of Eagle Insider, part of the 247 Network. Right now, if you're a Stanford fan, if you're a BC fan, we have special deals right now throughout our network. If you want to become a VIP, come over, sign up, 60% off for the next week. You want to make sure you take advantage of that. It's official visit season for both of our schools. And you want to get the best details from Jackson if you're a Stanford fan, and for me if you want BC knowledge. So it's a great deal. Make sure you check that out. Now, let's talk about this upcoming season. As I mentioned, David Bailey, I saw him enter the portal. I was like, ooh, that's going to hurt. What did he mean to your team?
Yeah, he was the guy when he was on. Big play potential at any given time, a huge pass rusher. There were also times he would kind of disappear, or I don't necessarily want to say the doghouse, or maybe a little bit of an injury. So it was kind of an up and down run with David Bailey. So they're going to miss the highs, and they've kind of also been used to the lows where a couple other players have filled in and managed that. So you lose the big play potential, but you don't necessarily have a huge gap there.
Now, starting quarterback, it looks like Elijah Brown. Is that right?
Well, he's the only one left now. They're bringing in 2 transfers. They bring in Dylan Risk from UCF and Ben Branson from Oregon State, a grad transfer, super old experience as far as college quarterbacks go. So between those 3, it'll be pretty much open. Elijah Brown and Bear Bachmeier shared the reps in spring, and Bachmeier left for BYU. So that's where they stand now.
Yeah, and I would not discount, mid-year quarterbacks. BC's had a couple that surprised me going to camp, and I was like, they're they didn't have the spring, they're never going to pick it up fast enough, and then boom, Grayson James last year ended up starting, partially over the season over Thomas Castellanos. You saw some of these things happening for many years. Actually, Thomas Castellanos started the year before. Grayson James was an early start. So before my readers get into my comments and say, AJ, you screwed that up. I didn't screw it up. I did screw it up, but just let me go on that one. Now, tell me a little bit about some players. Who are some names that did not enter the portal? Who are some of the names that, are going to be the key players for Stanford this year?
Yeah, it's a little thin at wide receiver. Like, there's one reception back from last year at this point. And
wow.
Unfortunately, there's a player or two that left after the season that probably thought they weren't going to get much playing time, who now would be stars if they had stuck around after more defection showed up. So, offensively, it's largely a clean slate except for Ben Roush, or at tight end. Roush is one of the staples of the offense that's been around, so that's going to be big to keep him. And at running back, they've got a lot of them. There's not necessarily one star, but they've got a bunch of options there. They could be 4 or 5 deep. Then everything else is pretty wide open. CJ Williams comes in from Wisconsin, was at USC, a former top 100 receiver. So he's the guy that could be a face of this offense. And on the defensive side, they're replacing some parts as well. They've got a few veterans. Anthony Franklin at tackle. Teva Tafiti at outside linebacker is going to be kind of the guy, with David Bailey moving on. They've got Scotty Edwards at safety, who's been a key piece. So it's a little bit of a mix of continuity and then some jobs up for grabs for some late transfers coming in.
Yeah, I mean, when I saw like what's happened with Stanford, this is about as picture perfect an example of what a transitional year is. Like, there's so much, like, I'm assuming Stanford fans are just like waiting for the season to end so they can like move on and get a new coach and then fill the roster in with guys that are, they can develop and build off of. It just feels like right now everything with Stanford is like they've got like Band-Aids everywhere, and a lot of, you're hoping that some of the portal guys hit too. So it's just tough. It's a tough place to be in right now. Now, let's talk a little bit about the trip. So we got an East Coast school heading all the way over to a West Coast school. It's a California trip. There's a lot of BC fans out in California. They're everywhere. We're a smaller school, but we do have fans everywhere. What is the culture like at Stanford? I mean, I've always watched and said they're just kind of out there and kind of fun. A little alternative, if it might be the nicest way to say that. But what is it like in that stadium? What should fans know?
Yeah, it is a nice stadium. It's only about 10, 15 years old now, and it's still in pretty good shape. And I started covering Stanford in 2021, which unfortunately is right about the time when covering Stanford got a little less fun than it was in 2010. So most of the games I've been there at the farm, it's been pretty empty, unfortunately. Oftentimes the away team's crowd is close to the home team crowd, and almost a little bit of a bowl setting where you got fans behind both sidelines, and that's about it. Sometimes the student section brings it pretty good, and they'll fill up a corner of the stadium. And so maybe early in the season, they might bring a little bit extra energy for this one. And the marching band and the tree are definitely strange sights to see. So, the marching band, they're going to have an MC within, and they're going to probably poke fun at Boston College one way or another that they can find, and put on their show. It's a very different halftime environment. And so otherwise, the campus is gorgeous. It's very open. It's called the Farm, and you feel like you're at such a place, not necessarily like the Bay Area, San Francisco, Oakland type of a deal. So, I know whenever Berkeley is on Boston College is a slate, that's going to be much more of a congested experience than it is over at Stanford. So it's a neat place, and hopefully Stanford's got a little momentum so that the environment's a little more lively.
I think a lot of BC fans are excited for this. Older BC fans especially remember some of the games. I remember, I'm going to age myself, being there and watching the last time I think they played was like 2004, 2005. It was a great game. I think what BC fans really like is kind of the similar profile the schools have, where it's an academic heavy school. And so they relate more to them than say like playing like Mississippi State or, Texas Tech. Like it's a school that there's a lot more in common than differences. So I think there's a piece of that especially older fans are really pumped about. Any good restaurants or bars? I feel like that's always a good question for fans that are going out that way.
Yeah. There are some options on campus depending on what time kickoff is, or 7:30. Yeah, it might be. We'll see exactly what happens. Maybe taking the tailgating scene just because, again, it is kind of a expansive area. As far as the campus goes, you cross the street, you're back in the Bay Area in Palo Alto. So there's a lot of food options out there.
Nice.
I'm originally a Fresno State guy, and I'm usually when I go to Stanford, I hit the stadium and I get back on the road back home. So I haven't tried all the places nearby, but definitely it's a techie place and there's a lot of reviews online.
Awesome. All right, Jackson, where can people find your work?
Yeah, as far as the Stanford coverage, it's at cardinal247.com, and my personal social media on Twitter or X, it's Jackson Moore 24/7.
Yeah, definitely follow Jackson if you want to get West Coast coverage of some BC opponents. And there's some common. I mean, BC fans know this, that when a target starts getting a Stanford offer and then we see a visit, we're like, oh, well, he's probably going to end up at Stanford. There's a big joke on my website that Luke Beklenko, who just transferred out, when I started at Eagle Insider, I had a 1 month I couldn't post before I got there. Like I had a no NDA or whatever, and I couldn't do anything. And there was a post on Luke Beklenko committing to Stanford, and it's the running joke on our site. They still talk about it. When he entered the portal, I think it was last year, my comment section, my message board blew up because they were like, he needs to come to BC. We need to have this go full circle. And he ended up, I think, at Louisville. So it didn't work, but there's a commonality. Again, I keep going back to this. This is why I think this is an interesting one. So thank you so much for joining us, Jackson. I appreciate your time. And again, check out Jackson over at Stanford 247, Cal 247, and San Jose State 247. Lots of good stuff. We have a great network. And if you're an insider and get a VIP, you can check out everybody's work on our network. And I love doing that. It's my go-to waste of time. Just checking out everything. So check that out. Thank you all for listening. Follow me on Twitter at AJBlack247. We'll be back again tomorrow for another episode. Is there going to be official visit news? Will there not be still? Or is it going to be quiet? I'll get into all of that. Thank you all, and I'll see you all again for another episode of Locked On Boston College, your team every day.